You're listening to the Braver Angels podcast. And we are back in business. Today's episode of the Braver Angels podcast is hosted by myself, John Wood Jr., and Monica Guzman. Monica, how you doing today?
Doing fantastic.
For people who are just listening to us as opposed to watching on YouTube, you missed Monica's little dance, which she does.
You can't miss my dances, y'all.
You can't miss the dance. So you got to check it out on YouTube to listen to the audio version, but then go back and do the whole thing over again, actually looking at us, so you can see Monica getting down a little bit. And Monica, I am excited because we are joined today by somebody who is both fabulous but fabulously unique, I think, and someone who has really kind of been blowing up in the podcast and in the digital space, maybe for a while, but definitely over the last few days, with a big fresh off of a big appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience and another appearance on the Rubin Report before that. She is a writer, comedian, and a particularly interesting political and cultural commentator. I won't say any more, but to say that we are joined by Bridget Phetasy. Bridget, how you doing today?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you.
I'll do a dance too.
Okay, so
now we're dancing together. See, this is how it starts. This is where it gets good. All right.
Oh man, everybody's dancing. Okay. So it's a dancing kind of deal.
I'm trying to move into the TikTok space.
Is that what it is? Oh man. So yeah, the world is crazy right now. We are all living through the sort of this odyssey of life under COVID-19, going into the 2020 election. And folks who are listening to this podcast are probably, in general, going to be people who are concerned about the country, interested in hearing people from different points of view, and who are also folks who are going to be interested in hearing interesting stories about Americans that, people whose stories don't always pop up in the mainstream kind of conversation. And in line with that, I was interested in talking to you a bit, Bridget, because you are known as a person who I think tacks to the left a little bit in your politics, but who likes to point out the BS on both sides. You've got a podcast called Dumpster Fire, which is, just a hilarious title right off.
Does not miss words. Got it.
No.
Yeah, exactly. I want to know a little bit quickly about your politics, but just give us briefly sort of a glimpse of kind of how you see yourself in the political landscape. And then after that, we want to jump into something deeper. But how do you see yourself that way?
I kind of identify as independent or politically homeless at this point. I think that I've talked about this idea of factory settings and being raised with this default Democratic liberal family. It was big East Coast family. I never really questioned any of the values. I just kind of showed up and pulled the lever that I was expecting to pull. I didn't think too much about politics. I was kind of convinced that my vote didn't matter, and that I was not rich enough to care about politics or poor enough to care about politics. I felt like I was just a cog in the wheel. I was waitressing. I was just struggling to make ends meet. There was a large percentage of my 20s and halfway into my 30s that I was kind of drunk, and I'm sober now. So I would say that, it's interesting because I grew up, my dad and mom actually met in DC, which I completely forgot about until recently. And I was conceived in DC, and she was working as a journalist, or she was working with journalists, and he was working on someone's campaign and politics. So when I ask myself how I ended up in this space, it's not all that strange. That is how my parents actually met. And I often forget that. And I was then born in New York City, and I always say that I peaked after I was an infant because I was like a baby model. So I was an infant star, and then it's just all been down.
Oh, wow.
I did Huggy ads, and then my parents had more kids and got out of it was New York in 1978, 79, 80, not known for its safety, and it was just expensive to have kids. And so we got out of there and moved to Minnesota, and my parents had 3 more kids. And so I'm the oldest of 5. We're all very close together in age. And it was always very, I had some exposure to Republicans in my family, but they were like the outcasts. They were treated the same way people who didn't drink were treated in my Irish Catholic family. They were just like the weird ones that you didn't talk to. You didn't want to go too far down a rabbit hole. And I never, honestly, it's so funny actually that we're even having this conversation, because I always wanted to write a book. The first book I ever wanted to write was French Fries or Coleslaw, and it was really just going to be a memoir about being a waitress and all the stupid choices that we make in life, little and big. It was all about choices. Mm. And I was probably 25 or 6 years old when I was writing. I wanted to capture all of the inane conversations you have with your customers and just the ridiculous questions. And so I managed in my drunken high waitressing self to write all of this stuff down. And it's like 35 pages of dialogue, and also my own feelings about, I was apparently very against the Bush administration, which I completely forgot. But I was reading this and I'm like, oh my God, I sound like AOC. I mean, I sound exactly at 27 years old like AOC sounds now. So that was interesting to find. I was really very liberal. I felt like nobody really cared. I think as a waitress in particular, because you're not usually a part of a union, you are exposed as a bartender too, kind of to the down and out of the world, and you're not really protected. You're expendable. In Rhode Island, I was waiting tables for $2.89 an hour, and they would have us come in and clean for the restaurant and kind of take all of us for advantage of all of us. And so I was pretty, there was a lot of rage. I see that rage now, the same rage I see on the left right now. And I deeply understand it, like on a very soul level. I think what I didn't understand then was that the solutions, that a lot of the policies that were causing these problems, I was living in liberal places. And so I didn't really somehow see the connection between liberal policies and a lot of the problems that I was seeing, or I couldn't make that connection. So
when you go back, what was the turning point? As you trace that line, you talk about that in the past tense. So
yeah,
what changed to get you here?
Honestly, it was 2015 when I was at Playboy, and I had been online since 2013. So I went on Twitter in 2008.
As a writer, correct?
Yes, as a writer.
Just
to clear that up. Yeah.
It would have been fine either way, of course.
Yeah. I had a column there, and they hired me to do a weekly column. And I did a couple of freelance pieces, and then I kept begging them for a column, and they finally were like, hey, we have a great idea. You should write a weekly column. So then I did that, and then eventually started doing the magazine, which was amazing. The kind of iconic, advice column in the magazine. But so I went online in 2013 on Twitter. I had been on since 2008, but never used it. In 2013, I came back from traveling around the world, and I was pretty lost, waiting tables again, and not really sure. I had been trying to sell scripted stuff in Hollywood. I had fallen into stand-up comedy in 2010. Someone dared me to do it. So I was just grinding it out in LA, just like you do. And then I started noticing in 2015 that I was self-censoring, just about my feelings about the culture war. I didn't really fall in lockstep with, I felt, a lot of my comedian friends, a lot of the left-wing I guess I started realizing there was a narrative around around this
Do you
time.
remember a specific thing that you could have
There were a couple things. So the first piece I ever wrote for Playboy was there was a piece going around about how it was like an anti-blowjob piece, basically. It was called a Vice writer. It was Why I Hate Sucking Dick. And I pitched a defense of blowjobs, basically, because someone has to defend them. And I felt the blowjob was being oppressed, and I needed.
Let's remember to put the parental discretion. Discretion.
Yeah, you might need to put explicit on this one.
So, gotta be real.
And so I wrote one about why I love giving blowjobs. I think that was the actual title. And it, I thought I thought the left wing women and feminists would be like, woohoo, we agree. Because that was the feminism. I'm Gen X, so I'm 41 years old. That was the feminism I was kind of raised with. Like, this sex is empowering, and I was met with so much of how I internalized the patriarchy, literally, and sorry.
No, that was too good.
Please continue.
And so
I've got to say, we have already broken some milestones in this episode.
Oh, good. This is usually how these go with me.
Keep going.
Come for politics, but this is kind of the weird journey that happened. So that was shocking to me, was this weird backlash from people that I thought would be a little bit behind me. And then I ended up writing, they asked me if I would maybe try out a column. So I pitched 6 or 7 ideas, and of course they picked the hardest one that I had to write, but it was the most common question that I got when I was doing a sex column. Years ago, when I lived in LA, my journey's kind of weird and meandering, but I was in LA when I was 20 and then left, and then came back again when I was 27. So when I was here, when I was 21, I was interning for this new website called buddyhead.com, which at the time was massive. They had this gossip column in the music industry, and it was huge. And I was kind of the only girl, the buddyhead girl is what they called me. And I did a sex column, and every single guy always asked the same question. It was, why do women date assholes? So I pitched this column, Women Date Assholes Because You're a Pussy. And, and they were like, that's the one we want. You're right. And so I wrote it. And again, I kind of thought that women would, because I was in some ways saying, this whole idea of being friend zoned is ridiculous. And if you're a guy who's really trying to sleep with a girl and you're manipulating her as a friend and pretending to be a friend, but your motives are other, that's not honest. But I got attacked by everyone. I got attacked by the men's rights activists. I got attacked because I kept saying, you're not a real man. And I didn't know I didn't know you couldn't say real man anymore. I had no idea. So I stumbled, and Joe, actually Rogan, we had run into each other from comedy, but I don't know that he even put together that I was the same person. He just saw it and retweeted it, so it blew up, and which was good for my first column out of the gates. And that one, I got a lot of crap for toxic masculinity. Essentially, I was called out for upholding these ideas of what it means to be a real man, and again, I stepped in it with, that was my first experience of really getting it from both sides, which I'm very comfortable and familiar with at this point. So those were, and then I guess I can talk about this now. I couldn't at the time. I wrote a piece where I had men email me and explain what they thought feminism was to me, and I got essays. I realized that no one was asking men really how they were doing. And anytime I'd say, hey guys, how do you feel about this? I would get 2,000-3,000 word essays from men, from hundreds of men. And so I asked them to.
Yeah, men don't have the chance to talk a lot, So
no.
you gotta take advantage of these opportunities when they arise.
And even if you do have a chance to talk, because I know you're oppressed and silenced every day, but this is the thing. I would say something like that, like, hey, no one's really asking men how they're actually doing. Maybe they talk about politics or sports or their feelings on certain topics, but no, men are not as freely able to express their feelings, I believe, in the public space as women are. And perhaps that's changing, but there was also kind of a lot of mixed messaging where I would see women on the left saying, oh, this is toxic masculinity. Bridget, you're saying all this stuff. And then the minute I'd say, hey, men aren't really allowed to talk about how they feel, they'd be like, shut up. They get to talk all the time, and they mansplain. So there was a lot of mixed. That was when I really started being exposed to the political correctness. I didn't know. I just didn't know. It was almost like I came out of a blackout and stumbled into the culture wars, which isn't actually what it was like. It is what basically happened. And then there was an internal, I was at Playboy, and there's a whole battle over a piece, that feminism piece, where I said I had men mansplain feminism to me. And it was supposed to be tongue-in-cheek and hilarious. And then I kind of cut and paste their whole idea of feminism. And it was supposed to be just an interesting view of feminism from the male perspective.
Right.
And the title I thought was hilarious and kind of clickbaity, but fun. And the internal women at Playboy, like, flipped it. I almost got fired. I didn't even know that there was an internal line that I could step over like that. And they were really upset that they were saying, if I don't know anything about feminism, why was I even writing about it? And this was a disgrace, and that I was minimizing feminism by having men explain it. And it was like a whole thing. So once I started pushing up against that stuff, and mind you, at the same time, so this is 2015, we're leading into the election, and I noticed I just wasn't saying things I wanted to say, just original thoughts in my brain about the way things were. There was a lot of hypocrisy in feminism that I felt like the left actually should be calling out, particularly the way that Melania and Ivanka were talked about and treated in the media, when we weren't supposed to be judging a woman for her clothes or her heels or her looks after, Hillary and all. It was just a double standard. And so I started saying those things and quickly realized why I couldn't say those things. And so I think, to answer in a long-winded way your question, 2015 would be the year that there were many moments that I realized, I had just been kind of swallowing a narrative just whole without questioning it, and B, that there was an entire other side or many sides to these. I didn't realize that there was a whole culture war that was going on, that was actually as influential and was really actually heating up with Trump as it was.
So your life is sort of unfolded in this whiplash kind of way. Okay, so ironic, because your story starts in DC, but there's nothing in your early upbringing that seems to make it clear that you would find your way into the political maelstrom. But after sort of struggling later in high school, correct? And I read that your parents separated early on, and so right, and so at a certain point you were living in a halfway house in Minneapolis.
When I was 19. Mm-hmm.
Right. You ultimately find your footing after experiencing life as a waitress and somebody who went through the sort of hard scrabble working existence that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and so many millions of us are familiar with. You ultimately find your footing as a writer, but then realize that you're being sort of judged and condemned in really harsh ways just for sort of being yourself, for having certain opinions, or for being willing to entertain the opinions of people that fall outside of a certain Overton window that you didn't even know existed.
No, that's exactly the case. Yeah. I always joke that I stumbled ass backwards into the culture wars. It's just, I never came, that's the name of the book I'm working on now, is The Accidental Pundit. I never meant to, if you had told me that I would be some kind of pundit or, you know, having interviews or talking about, I was always talking about culture. That was, I think that was always interesting to me, but, and I just, politics felt, I still feel like I'm out of my depth. And I also never found that it was something I wanted to be creative, and, you know, the culture wars and politics and punditry in particular does not feel aspirational to me. It feels like extremely reactive, and it feels very negative, and it seems like it exists to divide people and tear each other down. And so I never found any kind of inspiration in that space, even if it was I mean, I could have really, there was a moment in 2015 when I saw what was happening and I thought, I can double down and just go all in on the liberal narrative and be, you know, anti-Trump and be that person. And it would probably make me a lot of money, and I would probably get more jobs in writers' rooms in Hollywood, and I would be accepted by my peers and welcomed into the fold with the open, warm arms of a loving liberal enclave.
Right.
Or I can be honest and look myself in the eyes in the mirror. And I think because of my background, I had a lot of experience with the consequences of lying to myself, that I knew I would self-destruct.
Well, you said that politics doesn't feel very aspirational, but you know, we try to traffic in aspiration and inspiration a little bit here at Braver Angels. And as I'm listening to you speak, I'm reminded of. Did you ever see? And Monica, did you guys ever see the claymation Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer movie?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, years ago, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, right. I don't know if you guys remember the Island of Misfit Toys, but there's a.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. The Island of Misfit Toys in that movie. It's an island where toys that are too weird, I guess, or too, you know, too kind of out of the ordinary for Santa to find kids to give them to, wind up collecting on this island. There's a Charlie in the box. There's a bunch of different things.
And Charlie in the box. Yeah, it was great. It's funny, people kind of call my Twitter that. They often refer to it as the Island of Misfit Toys.
Well, I can see why, because you're definitely. I think that I and a lot of folks listening here would relate to you, because I mean, at our community, Braver Angels members, folks we have across the country. I mean, we fall all across the map, but it's not uncommon in our case to find Republicans who are who are gay, or who come from various different backgrounds, or Democrats who support, who are pro-life, or, you know, maybe have, or Mexican Americans whose parents are first-generation immigrants who supported Donald Trump. Or
oh yeah, so many.
Yeah, exactly.
I had so many people going after me, and I worked in a restaurant, and I was the only one whose English was my first language. And there were people there whose parents were Trump supporters, and people would come after me online, and they're like, do you know any Mexicans? Do you know any Hispanic? I'm like, yeah. And if you did, you would understand that a lot of them are like, build the wall, you know, pull up the ladder. We don't want to have people who came in legally, who jumped through the hoops, who did everything right. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I was just going to say that individualism is really American. But
yeah.
There's no space for that sort of individuality in the kind of sort of bifurcated conversation that we're so accustomed to. Monica, you'll note I sort of alluded to your own family.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. My parents are Mexican immigrants who voted for Trump and still very much support him. So yeah, very familiar with that.
Yeah.
I wondered if I could hop in, because it strikes me from some of the ways that you have built your brand and the conversation that you're holding around this political homelessness, that it's like you recognize that this is so much about identity. You talked about, there was a moment where you could have said, you know what, I'm just gonna happily be on the side that I was, the factory settings of me came with. I'm gonna happily be liberal. I'll be embraced by that side. But for listeners and viewers who may not know, Phetasy, it means something to you, right?
Yeah.
Can you say what that word means real quick?
So it's a word. So originally in 2006, coming from a background that I came from and from a broken home, I would go into greeting card stores and there would be nothing that spoke to me or my siblings. So my sister and I wanted to do a whole greeting card line, and the whole tagline was cards that say what the other cards are thinking. And it was all just for people who don't have that cookie cutter hallmark experience in life. My sister had her first child when she was 18. You know, there weren't cards. Maybe there's a little bit more now. I think that space has more to offer. But there was also just making fun of tragedy and laughing. And this has very much been part of how I've managed to cope. It's I guess a coping mechanism. And Phetasy, I kept having weird things happen to me in life that were very, I guess, Seinfeldian like experiences. And everyone always uses the word irony wrong. And they'd be like, oh, that's ironic. I'm like, it's not really ironic. It's more like when irony doubles back on itself and becomes literal, which made no sense in 2006 at all. And now and I would say things like it's beyond parody. It's when parody becomes reality. And so years ago, I started that company, basically started the company with that word, and then defined the word just because I needed it for myself and for my life. I was like, it's a Phetasy. And now it's almost like the reality has caught up with that, because it's essentially the world we are living in now, and it's funny, the people who follow me on my Phetasy.com and subscribe to my various sites and stuff, they know it well, and they're always saying it's like the age of Phetasy. You know, it's like the world is caught up, where it's when the headlines read like an Onion headline.
What made you want to wear that and make it your last name?
It wasn't even, again, this is kind of a Phetasy. My brand was born around the time social media was born. And I am deeply distrustful of everything and everyone, and didn't want to put my whole real name on the internet. And because I had made up a word, that was a brand new word, I just used it for MySpace. I was like, I'm just going to use Bridget Phetasy for all of my social media, not knowing what social media would be. And then I ended up, when I started doing stand-up, I was working with autistic kids and teaching yoga. And there's a certain amount of respectability and that I had to have that separation once I started doing stand-up, because my first stand-up routine was 10 minutes of how I was addicted to porn. So I was glad to have a stage name that hopefully I could keep things separated. They didn't stay separated in like a completely fantastical way. It all imploded, and I was forced to make a choice between kind of one path or another again in my life, where there was a moment where I was like, okay, I can not do comedy, be quiet, and not have any opinions, and work in schools and with autistic kids and teach yoga and do all the things I'm doing. But it's going to come at the cost of me being able to be honest. And although that was a much riskier gamble, I was kind of pushed in that direction. So yeah, it wasn't something that was conscious. I wish I could say it was like some brilliant marketing maneuver, but it was really just me trying to get the name out and not knowing what social media was, and not wanting my real name out there. And then it just stuck, and then it became my stage name. And now I actually inadvertently am so glad that that there's space between. Sometimes I'll hear it when I'm going on stage, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. It's still not, but it triggers this thing in my mind, especially when I'm doing stand-up, like I'm performing, or there's a little bit of distance between the Bridget that's out there. Not much, because I'm very much me. but there's still space between that persona, if you will, and the Bridget who's picking up dog doo in the backyard. You know, it's a backyard.
Help give you courage when you are actually entering the fray. I look at some of that. You mentioned that there was that moment again where you could have just been liberal and gone with that side, and you decided, you noticed that you fell ass backwards into the culture wars, but you could have kind of sat down, but it seems like you stood up.
It gave me courage in that it didn't put my family at danger. So there was separation that occurred, and it separated me from what I was doing publicly, because I decided to publicly start spouting off all my opinions and being, I guess somebody called me a firebrand, which I had to Google. If that doesn't mean that I needed to drag my whole family into it. And I think in 2015, I recognized how important it was to have that space when I was seeing people go after people's families and all this stuff. It just seems so unfair. Like, just because I'm out there my family disagrees with me on a lot of stuff. When I went on Glenn Beck, my dad basically was like, "Oh, so you've gone to the dark side," basically. I think that was maybe his exact words. So, right. So it gave me courage because it separated me from, it separated my family from what I was doing. But it also, I don't see what I did as courageous, because there's a thin line for me between stupidity and courage. And I don't know that I had that much to lose. So if I was a different person, if I was, Megan Amram or some huge Hollywood writer who had hundreds of thousands of dollars and a massive career, I wonder would I have spoken up? I don't know. I don't know that I luckily hadn't really made it to maybe so that I could be totally honest. There's so many people out there who have a lot more to lose than me, who email me all the time and say, keep going and thank you. And I can't say this stuff because it will cost me my livelihood or job or standing in my community.
Well, the persona of Bridget Phetasy, with an emphasis on the Phetasy, seems important. I was going to say seems appropriate for the moment that we're in. I mean, I can remember, it doesn't seem like too long ago when people were saying that politics was starting to become like reality TV. Mm-hmm. And fast forward to now, of course, we do have a president of the United States who was the most popular reality TV show figure in America. And if that isn't crazy enough, at this time, I mean, some of the people we've elevated, folks like Kanye West have become some of the biggest kind of cultural figures in the political space in American life, defending, right, Donald Trump, Kanye West, and the Kardashians suddenly being celebrated by Republicans and conservative America.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I remember when Kanye West said that George W. Bush didn't care about black people, right?
Right.
And you fast forward a little bit, and suddenly reality is kind of doubled back into itself.
Yeah.
About how you put it.
I think Kanye felt that same pressure. I just remember it felt like a pressure to conform, and I can see someone like Kanye wanting to resist that. The resistance for me was not necessarily resisting this administration in the ways that were very publicly the resistance. It was more just resisting ideology wherever it was coming from, because there felt like so much pressure to identify with a tribe and to disavow the other tribe and to state your allegiance to whomever you might be behind. And there's still that pressure even now.
Well, the pressure intensified.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. Go ahead, Monica.
Go ahead. Sorry. Okay, yeah. God, interruptions. I'm bad at those. I'm so curious about this, Bridget, because you've said that your inboxes have become a confession booth for people who feel like they can't say these things, you know, out in public, but they trust you because somehow you occupy a space that seems daunting, you know, implausible. Um, to what extent do you think that you are giving voice to something that needed a voice?
I think there's a big, you know, it's funny. I wrote a whole book proposal about the politically homeless, and I was told by many, many, many publishers that the center doesn't exist. And my inbox begs to differ. And it's not just coming from the left, it's coming from the right, it's coming from, there are so many people who feel like they're just tired of the tribalism. But I think that as more and more people get radicalized, basically it's safer. You know, I understand. I don't begrudge anybody. I also understand that some people have these beliefs and they truly believe them, and that is, I don't judge that either. I understand where my friends who are very staunch liberals are coming from, and the same as people who are coming from the conservative perspective. I really seek to try and understand why people think the way they're thinking, and what made them, what about their factory settings or what about their upbringing did they either resist, or did they feel out of lockstep with, or what made them the way they are. So I'm very curious about all of that, and I think that maybe that's why people trust me twofold. So what I've been told, at least, is that because I'm so open about my own struggle, my struggles with depression, with anxiety, with addiction, all of these things, people trust that I'm not going to judge them. So they feel like it's a safe place to confess whatever it might be. And I mean, when I was at Playboy, I had men telling me all kinds of things that they were trying to wrestle with, that they didn't feel like they could tell anyone. So there's
Something about you've been judged so much
Mm-hmm.
in certain parts of your life that,
Yeah.
yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
That
and just
people feel
moving
like
a lot. Moving every year and a half really informed, more than anything, my resistance to tribes. I became deeply distrustful of groups because I was constantly bullied and made fun of, and there were so many cliques. And being the new girl every year and a half in a school, you become very, I mean, I still have this ability, and it's almost, I didn't realize it until I got older, but it's so ingrained in my kind of, just from growing up and being new. I can pretty much walk into any environment and evaluate the pecking order like instantly. It's just it's a default thing that happens in my brain,
because
where
you've gone from group dynamic to group dynamic, you start to see the patterns, put them together,
yeah,
and predict.
yeah. So it's a thing that and I think it probably has helped me in networking situations, because I can quickly evaluate, you know, like, then I have a half an hour here to talk to the people that I might need to talk to, and my brain just kind of does it automatically. But it also made me, you know, more compassionate towards people who are in the out group, people who were bullied, people who were, I have a deep resistance to mean girls. Like, I still have, and I know that I carry probably some of that with me still. I have a lot of insecurity. It's very hard even right now for me in this space, because my whole life I always had this complex that everybody was talking about me because I was the new girl, and sometimes they were. And so now, when, like, on the heels of Joe Rogan, when there's a lot of just like, oh, fuck her and that girl and blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I don't know if you can swear.
We can now.
I apologize. But, you know, all the things that get said, I definitely, the first 2 days after his thing came out, I was like upset, you know, and people are sending me the mean things. And it's an old familiar feeling that gets triggered over and over and over again, just by nature of being falling into this space and being in this space. But I'm also weirdly well suited for it, because I was just that chameleon growing up in high and the goths and easily move from group to group because I didn't, I think I lost my own identity a bit in all of that moving, and B, it was just like a survival mechanism that I developed.
So here's a question. When you look at when you interact with, your followers on the left and the right, you look at people sending you messages in your inbox, or you're just tracking the conversation on both sides of the aisle and picking up on the anger that's coming from everywhere in American politics. Do you tend to see, therefore, do you tend to see a bit of yourself in all of these different groups? Your life as you've lived it, does it allow you to relate to the anger coming from the pro-Trump and the anti-Trump sort of side of the conversation? If so, what does that feel like?
I think I identify more with the left. So I still identify more with that. I find myself because when I was writing for Playboy, I was so piled on by the right all the time, in particular people on the right saying I'm the kind of woman that is the reason that society is, collapsing, and just that women writing things like I was writing are the reason that our like Western civilization is crumbling and whatever.
So these aren't love letters. Okay.
What?
I said these are not love letters.
No. And even just now today, sometimes I'm like, okay, maybe I do on policy feel a little bit more libertarian or conservative, and then something with porn will come up and I'm like, oh, never mind, thank god I'm not one of you, never will be. you're too prude. And so that kind of that I do notice that I still feel very, when they started kind of all welcoming me into the fold as I was being pushed out of the left or reacting to the left, I didn't trust them because I was like, oh, I'm just going to be your little token girl that left the left and you can weaponize me. So I was aware of the fact that I'd be viewed as a reactionary, which in some fairness, I am reacting to the left, and B, that there's a high potential that I will be used by the other side to make a point or to own the libs or whatever. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, and what I noticed was that when they kind of welcomed me, they were getting tons of crap from their audience, and generally like incel types and people who were really getting angry. That there was a huge portion of the internet when I started appearing more on Ben Shapiro's Twitter feed and around right-wing personalities, that they believed that I was a deep state plant sent to undermine the conservative party. This was like a whole, there were blogs written about this. So
must be sort of interesting. Speaking of, I don't know if this is more irony or Phetasy, but it's interesting to see yourself as the subject of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it's bizarre because again, I wish I was that smart. Like, you guys are giving me way too much credit to think that I would be in. And what is that theory? It's the simplest thing that's usually the explanation. Is it Occam's razor?
Occam's razor.
I'm not sure which one it is. It's the other one, I think.
There's another one. I just saw it the other day. I can't think of it. But yeah.
Schrodinger's cat. No, I'm sorry. It's probably.
I'll think of it. Yeah. So and then to lose friends on the left, that was hard. People who just unfollowed me or blocked me, and people in comedy, and that was upsetting. And then again, I always had to constantly check in with myself because rejection is painful. So I don't necessarily want to be reacting to feeling rejected. And there probably were moments where I was lashing out at the left because they were rejecting me. And that has been a tricky thing I feel a lot more grounded in just being an independent and more stable in my center of not knowing anything really and taking everything piece by piece than I did, say, in 2016, when I really felt like the forces that were moving me were a little bit out of control. It felt like a giant game of improv. Mm-hmm. So I remember when Ben Shapiro asked me on to his election special and he put me as an independent, and I saw that email and I was like, ugh. I knew I was going to do it. And I had a really good friend who said, stop what you're doing right now unless you're going to go on this show, because why are you even talking if you won't go on this show and take this opportunity? And it was a very good point. And then it became kind of like, well, Gavin McGinnis wants you to come on his show. And it's like, yes, and now I'm going on Gavin McGinnis' show. Yes, and now I'm going on Glenn Beck's show.
Wow. The going back and forth, I mean, when you talk about the conspiracy theories, sometimes conspiracy theories come up when people just cannot believe that this is what it looks like. Things are so tribal and divided.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people just cannot believe that there is such a thing as not having a tribe. You say in your Twitter profile, my tribe is tribeless.
Yeah.
And which just sticks with me because I think in some corners, right, of America, there's this feeling that there cannot be a tribelessness, that has to be impossible now, that all the forces and incentives pushing media and politics and social, polarization, all of it, urban versus rural, religious, secular, we're all lining up so neatly into these two stacks that how in the world can there be anyone who dares
right
crisscross in any way and be out and loud about it?
Right. It hurts. I think it is unsettling. It's easy. You want that, again, from moving. I understood the need for people to kind of put everyone in boxes. And Twitter, when I went on Twitter is really how I ended up in all of this. I could probably trace every single thing, every job opportunity, everything back to Twitter. And it was that, which is what is interesting. I came back on Twitter and I noticed I got introduced to the writers on Twitter, like the guys who wrote for like Seth MacFarlane and the show writers, and they were funny and hilarious. And then the comedians, and I suddenly understood how I could use Twitter or what Twitter was for. And I just observed it for 2 weeks. I just sat and observed it. And after 2 weeks, I was like, oh, Twitter is high school. This is just a big high school. A bunch of clicks. And you got the jocks over there talking about sports, and you've got the cool girls over there, and you've got the more conservative prude ones who love Jesus over here, and you've got the goth chicks over here. It was like all of a sudden one day it became very clear to me.
It's high school in 2 dimensions.
Yeah, and which is even worse. And then I was like, oh, I just have to be hypersexual, which is how I got attention in high school a lot. And then there was a whole time where which is why it's funny that the right kind of embraced me, because I was like all about freeing the nipple and showing my boobs online. And it's been a very strange journey. And, I look at guys like Ben Shapiro and Glenn and all of them, and we disagree on many things, but they're willing to sit down and have a conversation with me, and they're willing to take the hit from their audience, because there was a hit that they took for even elevating me or talking to me or even taking me seriously at all, because I was the girl that showed her boobs online from left who wrote for Playboy, which does not fit into any of their boxes at all. And I give them credit for, having the bravery on them, their own bravery, to even have that conversation with me, because I'm sure it did cost them, maybe not a lot, but I'm sure they lost subscribers and followers or people just for interacting with me or even talking to me.
Yeah. I think the beautiful thing about Shapiro and Beck, just to take your examples, is that these are folks who have a real point of view about things philosophically and politically, but they're still willing to hold a space for people to kind of come in from outside of that and actually sort of get along and treat each other right as Americans
Yeah.
is sort of what we want. We want to preserve the space for that, right?
Right. Right.
It doesn't mean that the argument itself over the things that matter politically is somehow trivialized or set aside. We're still going to have our elections. We're still going to, fight and argue, but there should be a way to do it that allows us to preserve, friendship or a basic level of respect. Because it's like without that, it seems like everything else has got to fall apart.
Right.
Eventually.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true, because on the left, what I would notice is that it's just, it's so interesting to me because the press had this kind of awakening after they had the 2016 election about being in a bubble. Oh, we didn't see this coming. We were living in a bubble. And so I saw somebody who was a Samantha Bee producer who used to follow me asking for people who had more independent takes to follow, people to follow. I'm like, you followed one, you followed me, and you unfollowed me because you didn't like what I was saying. And it seems like the bubble was reinforced as opposed to learning from it. It became reinforced the bubble, and now actually anyone who even associates with anyone outside of the bubble is out. It's like it became a weird. You would think they would want to talk to, if they were genuinely interested in what they perhaps might have missed in the 2016 election. You would think they would want to make space for people like me and many other voices out there like me who were pushing back against some of the craziness on the left. And instead, we all got labeled carrying water for Nazis and right-wing, conservatives who just didn't know we were conservatives and kind of pushed out of the conversation, the mainstream conversation.
Yeah, I think that the idea though that you've articulated, that Monica referenced, about having a tribe of tribeless people, it's funny to me because I feel like that is kind of what it is some of us are seeking to build, sort of.
Right.
I mean, I've experienced some of the things you've experienced, not quite in the way that you have. But what I've experienced in my life is sort of a drifting from left to right that has seen people who used to know me and my politics pretty well earlier in life, sort of looking at me and saying, what exactly happened to John? What exactly happened? And I've been fortunate because I haven't really been demonized, or, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've been in hostile situations for sure. I've met, I can remember meeting people at conventions who were, on the left, and we'd have a beautiful conversation and agree on things. And I'd say, oh yeah, what's your background in politics? Like, oh, I was, Republican nominee for Congress or what have you. Like, and I can remember people saying, oh, woman saying, oh God, that's disgusting. And sort of like turning around and walking away. I'm like, ooh, God, that hurt a little bit, But the thing is that when you find relationships with people who look at things differently than you do, but you can connect on things that are deeper than just politics, it actually makes politics more enjoyable, and it makes you better, I think, at advocating for the things that you genuinely sort of believe in. And I think a lot of people look up to you, Bridget, because you're creating space for that kind of an interaction and a culture to kind of help bubble up a little bit. So I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but do you get that a bit?
Again, it's entirely accidental, and because I'm kind of a moron, in that I'm not a policy wonk. And so I have to stay, and I've been advised too, just by people much smarter than me, to stay focused on the forest and not get lost in the trees, because really my wheelhouse is sex and relationships, mental health and wellness, addiction and recovery. These are umbrella topics that comedy and free speech, these things from my perspective cross all political boundaries, and everybody, and no matter what politics you might be in or whatever tribe you're on, is going to have issues in their life and relationships or sex And one of the things that I think really on the right they've lost out on is that a lot of those cultural mental health and all of that stuff, because it ends up so much in the left-wing publications and media, they just don't have the benefit of a lot of that material. And because the right-wing media feels so reactive, because it's not the dominant, like the approved message, or they're the underdog in the culture war, from what I can tell. So their focus they just don't put out culture pieces. The media, it seems like everything in right-wing media is just focused on politics and reacting to politics, instead of putting out just cultural pieces like, here's how, mental health, and just, or putting out a comedy sketch that's just made by a conservative outlet, instead of a comedy sketch that's making fun of owning the libs or something. It seems like their framework is always from the perspective of reacting to the culture. And I always found that a lot of my inbox at Playboy was filled with men who felt judged basically by left-wing publications, and they felt like they didn't have a place where they could. This is why I was saying yesterday on an interview that I love Joe Rogan, that he's held that space for the the red-blooded American male in a time when everybody kind of abandoned it. And this is part of the reason that he's risen to the top so much, is that men can feel like they can be dudes. and he gives them permission to be dudes. And I think he's actually a really good example for dudes, because he's trying to better himself and be healthy and curious. And so I've tried to stay in those lanes because that's where I'm comfortable, but it's also more important to me that people don't feel like they can't talk to me about their anxiety or depression because I'm a liberal and they're a Republican, because that is hurtful to people. I think mental health is so important. It's as important as physical health. And we clearly have a problem in our country with mental health issues, and people are really struggling. So my default is always, how do I sort through all the noise so that I can hopefully hear from as many people who are suffering as possible, and not be limited by just the people in my tribe who are suffering, because that kind of suffering crosses, and free speech is another one too. We need to defend that, everybody. So go on.
Yeah, what does humor let you do that you think you wouldn't have been able to do if you weren't so fluent in it? You talk about laughing while the world burns.
Yeah.
You talk about not taking things too seriously. Satire's always had a power. People think fondly of Jon Stewart, and all the things he did and how he stepped into the political world. But yeah, what to you does humor allow you to do that maybe others can't if they don't wield it, if they don't use it?
I think it goes back to even the court jester could make fun of the king. And I just think that when there's something about humor that really great comedians, I believe, are funny philosophers like Carlin and Chappelle, and they're able to look at the world. And somebody, I think I had I don't remember whose quote this is exactly, but they said that laughter is the sound of people relating, essentially, especially in stand-up comedy, just people identifying. And
I heard Jay Leno say something to that effect, talking about politics. He said the amazing thing about laughter is that when people are laughing at something, it means they're seeing something the same way, right?
Right.
That's why humor can cut politics.
And I think now more than ever, you've seen this kind of attack on comedians, and there's this attempt to bring comedy to police comedy, which to me is, I started seeing this in the comedy community around 2014, 2015. of comedians kind of policing one another's speech and jokes. And I was like, whoa, like we can give each other, crap for bombing, but we don't get to like say that you can't make that joke because it's offensive. That's crazy to me. Seeing comedians online going after other comedians for their material was mind-blowing to me when I was seeing like big, huge stars going after other huge stars for their, and saying like, this is offensive. I'm like, you're a comedian. Your job is to be offensive and find the edge and walk past it and push it. And that is, it's the freest speech of all. Stand-up comedy in particular seems like such an American art form. It's just so liberating. I remember the first time I ever got on stage, and I was always saying outrageous things like at Christmas dinner just to say them because I couldn't, and because they were funny and they would amuse me. And I remember after getting off stage, I was like, why didn't anyone ever tell me like there was an appropriate outlet for all of those years of me just being outrageous?
What do you think, what is your most generous interpretation of why people in society are starting to do that more?
I do think that there's this whole idea of punching up and punching down, which I understand. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I do understand that from what I can understand, you're making fun of vulnerable communities. I do think, as the culture evolves, jokes do evolve. You'll go look back at things that people joked about and you're like, wow, that's racist as hell. You can't make that joke anymore because we know better. And that's a good thing. But again, kind of going back and looking through history and going in and rewriting all of history or trying to erase people for things historically, that's just weird to me. I'm like, yeah, things change. The things that were permissible 50 years ago aren't permissible now. And I think part of the culture is shifting, and there is this cultural shift around the vulnerable, but there's also a lot of speaking on behalf of communities. And I don't necessarily feel like that's in the same way that it's not my kind of comedy to make fun of people, because I've never liked Chelsea Handler because I always thought she was a mean girl. She reminded me of all mean girls. She made fun of people and I thought she was mean. I do make fun of behaviors. No one wants to hear a comedian who's like, here, I had a great day today. Want to hear about it? No, we're supposed to make fun of things and poke fun of them. But I don't feel like it almost feels condescending for me to say, oh, you can't make fun of that person in a wheelchair because of XYZ, even though that person in a wheelchair, I feel like everyone's equal when everyone's getting roasted and we can roast each other. That is equality to me. It's not I wouldn't want to be in some special little bubble where nobody could make fun of me because I was like this select group that was untouchable. That seems actually more offensive than anything to me. But I also come from a family where if you couldn't handle being teased, you were seen as weak. Like you had to be able to laugh at yourself. You had to, and you had to be able to stand up for yourself and give it back.
Survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
Or survival of the wittiest, maybe.
Or you were seen as like the sensitive one, which God forbid in an Irish Catholic family, like you show any sensitivity at all. That was like the cardinal sin. So I don't know. I actually think the heart, so twofold. I think that my most generous interpretation is that everyone's heart is in the right place. And then it has been co-opted by critical theory and intersectionality and all of these other things that I feel can lead to toxic virtue signaling, where you're just using your ability to take somebody out or make fun of them for their joke to signal like how virtuous you are. And that's another weird instinct in general, especially in comedy. I'm like, you're stand-up comedy. We're all pieces of shit. Like, we're all equal here. Don't even try and pretend.
Don't need to play the woke Olympics.
That green room. I know what you've done. I've seen you.
Well, it goes back to this idea that we are losing kind of our space to come and meet each other as we are. I think, right? Because I mean, that's just, to me, it should be both the beautiful thing about comedy and democracy, that you can come and meet other people as you are, where you're coming from, and be honest about your point of view and what you believe or what you find funny, knowing that nobody's perfect and knowing that everybody has got a past that we're trailing behind us that might account for some of the crazy things that come out of our mouths, or some of the crazy ways in which we might sort of form our politics. And that should be, it's not to say that we don't all have room to improve dramatically and that we might not be wrong about a lot of things, but I think it's the absence of sort of, to borrow some religious language, the absence of grace and redemption and forgiveness, I think, in the interactions, that makes politics today so, well, you said it earlier on, so uninspiring, so lack of aspiration, right? And I don't hear you say the words, forgiveness and redemption very, very much, but I still feel like you're sort of creating a space for that by creating a space for understanding. You're a person that people can, from a wide range of different backgrounds, can look at and say, she would get me in one way or another. I think because you're kind of honest about, you don't have any warts, but metaphorically speaking, you're honest about the warts and so forth. You're honest about the things that you've been through and your own limitations, what you do and don't know. And so, for me, that is inspiring. It's even more inspiring because you obviously are doing it on accident, like you've been saying,
Yeah, it's just, I think I'm just trying to be as transparent and honest as possible about what I do and don't know. I mean, I'm desperately trying to learn a lot about policy because I feel I recently read an article with Kim Kardashian, which was surprising even to me, but she was talking about how she was doing the criminal justice reform and was at the White House, and she's now reading the law and learning to become a lawyer because she felt so out of her depth. And I get that. I understand that feeling where she was like, I mean, look at her trajectory. Are you kidding me? She started with a sex tape and now she's at the White House. She must have been like, what is happening here? And she's using her platform to try and make changes. And this is a person who we all want to put in a box, myself included. I love making fun of the Kardashians. They're fun to make fun of, but I do respect that she recognized her limitations and is taking steps to try and educate herself, because that really is, when I interviewed Jacob, the Holocaust survivor who came on my show, we were talking about religion, and he was saying for him, and it all comes down to education. He was like, education is always the answer, more and more education. So I just, if anything, the past 4 years have taught me how little I know. I just find myself in this space, like even talking to Sam Harris on my podcast this week, I'm like, why are you talking to me? I mean, there is a huge, massive feeling of imposter syndrome because I don't understand, and probably Sam was asking himself that same question. But he's so smart, and he's somebody whose books I read and I looked up to, and now I'm having conversations with these people, and it is very surreal, and I'm grateful for it because it keeps me so humble. I mean, speaking of redemption, I had Mark Halperin on my podcast, and I didn't know what the reaction to that would be. And I got so many emails from men thanking me for giving him the opportunity to even speak, because
for people who might not remember, Mark Halperin is the journalist who and he's a contributor at MSNBC. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Right, and who it turned out I'm a little sketchy on the details, but he had a number of sexual assault or at least sexual harassment, I think, episodes. in his professional life that came to life and is part of the Me Too kind of, sequence of events. He sort of fell from a very prominent journalistic career and a lot of shame and scandal. But anyway,
and a lot of people told me not to have him on, and but my whole podcast is about grit and resilience, and if there's no hope for redemption, there's no hope. So this is also where I ended up landing with atheism. I was saying this the other day. I kind of dabbled in atheism for a while, and who was it? I think it was Tyler, he's like the president of the Blaze, and he put it best. He said, I'm not one to pull the raft out from underneath people. And that really struck me when we were having a conversation about just religion and who am I to kind of pull that raft out from under anybody, if that's knowing what I know about the human condition and just what it takes to get through. I can have my opinions, but also leave room for people to have their own beliefs and faith and hope for redemption and hope, which is so important. You have to have that. And with this modern Thunderdome we're in, there does seem to be a lack of grace and a lack of redemption, and that is causing a lot of hopelessness, which is contributing to the mental health issues. And it's not, and now everybody's isolated. Like, it's a recipe for so much misery and sadness. And we have all this technology to be, I have this little community on Phetasy.com, and I see people and they check on each other and they share recipes and they reach out and lift each other up when they're drowning. And I wish that there were more places like that online, because we have all of this ability to communicate and reach out to each other in the void. And yet I find that in particular in these big social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook, that it's all devolved into people just pushing each other down and not extent, everybody, like you said, it's 2D high school. So everybody just assumes the absolute worst intention of whatever the tweet or the thing might be. And that's a weird thing, because I don't generally assume the worst of everything that I read. I really try to be like, okay, well, where is this maybe coming from? But I think everyone, go on.
I was fascinated by your community guidelines on that community, because one of them, we were talking about making space. And community guidelines are used across the political spectrum these days to just kind of establish the space that ought to be made for whatever the community values. And one of yours was, we're allowed to change our minds, and so are you. We realize this is a novel concept in 2019, but let's bring it back into the world, shall we? So even granting people that flexibility, even reading that, it is refreshing, because there is sort of a, Ralph Waldo Emerson is my favorite philosopher, and there's a quote of his that I love, that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
I love that.
That you have to say today what you said last week, or else people will abandon you or will mistrust you. That somehow we don't allow for the fact that this is life. If we're not moving through life, learning new things and adjusting our whole landscape mentally, then what are we doing?
Right.
So even the fact that we've gotten to a place of such rigidity is kind of shocking to me. And the other thing that stood out to me that I wanted to point out in your guidelines was you had a framing around that this is conversations with real people about the real struggle, and that will remind you that we can laugh in pain and cry in joy, but there's no greater mistake than hiding from it all. Because I thought about all the people how your inbox is a confession booth. And, to some extent they feel that they're not hiding because at least they can talk to you, but they're hiding anyway.
Yeah.
They're hiding from it, from everywhere else. And I wonder if you could, maybe you've already emailed them back something that you want them to do, but what would you tell them, when it comes to this principle of the worst thing you can do is hide from it all? What would you tell people who feel they can't express?
It's so individual, case by case, and I was thinking, just to go back to the comedy thing, I was thinking about how comedy is so democratic and it's very nature. It's just like the good jokes succeed, the bad ones don't. If you get up there and you go on a racist tirade, you're probably going to get your butt kicked if you do it in the wrong place afterwards, and again, there's this whole idea, I've seen this a lot of like, oh, it's free speech, and like, we need to defend it, which we do, but there's also a weird, it's like people don't seem to understand that there are also consequences of that free speech too. So yeah, you can say what you want to say, but you still might experience a consequence of it. That doesn't mean you get to just be free of consequences either. And in terms of hiding, it depends on what you're hiding. I think my whole mission in life is to uncover and expose as much of my own kind of struggle as I can, and in the hopes that it gives people permission to do that themselves. Because I think the more people that freely share their struggle and freely share their, are vulnerable and also are not afraid to be wrong. This is one of the, again, Joe is talking about this is one of the reasons that I think people like him, is that he's wrong all the time. And he's always like, I totally got that one wrong. And he'll cop to it. And I think people feel so much pressure to there, and we see it all the time in the political spectrum. Instead of saying, whoa, got that one wrong, I apologize, and let's make a correction, it's like doubling down. And then on top of it, whataboutism. And it's these two things happening in conjunction with each other. It's like collapsing the entire political discourse, because whataboutism is destroying the whole conversation. And the whole idea of not being able to take any responsibility, I think it just comes from that fear of looking silly or stupid or wrong. And I mean, I find myself on Dumpster Fire. We were doing one last week and I was like, that's because I'm a gypsy. And I'm like, can I still say gypsy? And I can't tell you how many times.
That is so funny, because I almost called you a gypsy at a certain point in this episode, and I stopped for that very reason.
Exactly.
I'm not entirely sure if I can say that, actually.
But that's what's so, and that is what's so scary to me, because I notice I'm free, I've pretty much liberated myself. I feel very free to say, in a certain respect, I feel like a lot of the left-wing blue checks who maybe paid me any heat are like, that girl, like, we can't even try and cancel her. And they don't, I've liberated myself from having to worry about a lot of that. But I wonder how many times in a day I'm like, this happened on our podcast the other day. I was like, yeah, I'm sitting Indian style. And then the girls who I do my roommate Samantha and cousin Maggie, who are we all three do the Dumpster Fire together. They're like, you can't say that anymore, Bridget. And I was like, what? They're like, you haven't been able to say that for like 10 years. And they're like, it's crisscross applesauce now. I was like, what kind of crap is this? And so I think that, I definitely have, even talking to Joe the other day, I found myself, there were moments when I was talking about trying to say that there's a gap, there's this like summer gap that no one's talking about in terms of what's going to happen with COVID and shutting down all the schools for this long. And I'm like, it's not going to hurt these like kids who are in the suburbs who have tutors and whatever. I'm like, it's going to hurt the vulnerable communities. And I found myself, I kept saying vulnerable, and really I was trying to say primarily Black and Latino communities are going, but I don't even know if I can say that. So then I found myself I'm like, oh, it's funny how vulnerable communities has become like the okay term for, minorities or people of color. I don't even know, as someone I'm like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what.
That's what happens what happens when we're not sure what term to use is we have to go up a level of abstraction. And so when you have to go up too many levels of abstraction, it becomes like a very you know, up in the clouds song lyric. Like you don't know what you're talking about anymore. And that I see that happen a lot, all with good intentions. People just wanting to make sure that they're understood, but that nobody gets them the wrong way. And so we go up, we go up, we go up, we go up, we go up. And sometimes it's fine, and sometimes it's just like, huh?
And it's fair. I think that the again, my biggest fear, and as somebody who's kind of come from the left and been accused of a lot of things, there was a moment where I was like, am I hurting people? You know, I don't. That is my biggest fear. And I think unintentionally, when someone is that afraid of that, you end up doing it. So inevitably, I'm going to probably end up, but I don't want to hurt communities. That is like a horrifying idea to me. And again, even as a platform grows, I feel like I don't want to be irresponsible. But at the same time, I also want to be free, and I want to be free to mess up, and I want to be free to, but I can already hear when you get kind of clipped like that and piled on and you get context, it's like, even talking to Joe, we were talking about the ventilators, and I started laughing because I'm like, it's going to be hilarious when we find out that the ventilators were killing people, and we both laugh because we're comedians and we laugh at dark stuff. And then immediately in my head, I was like, I don't really mean that, because I could just see that clip, like, oh, Bridget Phetasy laughs at people dying on ventilators. And I don't think.
But did you say, oh, I didn't mean that? No, you couldn't say it in the moment. You just had to be like, well, that happened. It's probably fine. But now
I think I did say, obviously, I don't mean, like, I hope.
Okay, you did say.
Funny. Because this happened with Dave Rubin and I too. We were talking about the Australian fires, and then again, I laugh at everything. I don't think there's really anything off limits. And even today, I posted the Sam Harris thing, and someone's like, "The only thing you know about this girl is that she laughed at the Australian fires." I'm like, "Oh my God, that's gonna haunt me forever. That will haunt me forever." Is that I thought that I was, giggling that I forget what it was. It was like, maybe it wasn't funny, but. You're gonna be burned at the stake for all of those mistakes. And so it's hard when you're doing any of these kinds of talks or podcasts or anything to not be constantly like, oh God, the whole time I'm like, like, am I saying something that's gonna come back to haunt me forever?
Yeah, well, the good news is that you'll have a lot of company in the trash heap of aspiring public figures who said the wrong thing and were canceled for it. That's the direction that we're all going in, I guess, unless we are able to do something that I think would be good for everybody, which is to create a space where people can be honest about what they think, but actually have a little bit of grace and humility in saying, you know what, let's judge people by their intentions as opposed to whether or not they trip the wrong wire, right?
Yeah.
The wrong phrase to try and get a certain point across,
Yeah.
So that's what we want, and I think that's what we're all working for, and that's why we really wanted to have this conversation with you today. Bridget, I feel bad because we went longer than we meant to, but not as long as we wanted to. And so, all that means is that first of all, I've got a couple invitations for you. One, I want you to come to my church and deliver a sermon. I want you to find your favorite Playboy article and preach from the pulpit, whatever you want to say. I think you've got a good platform for you there.
Okay.
And secondly, I think Monica and I and everybody listening are both hoping that you'll hang out a bit more in the Braver Angel space.
Yeah, I love what you guys are doing so much. I think it's so vital is the word I would use, because again, I've heard just as much from people coming from the right to, being alienated by their own tribe or whatever, that we have to be able to talk. If we lose that ability to have those conversations with each other and to be able to say the wrong thing, it's to be able to say something and not have them go, oh, offensive, like you're canceled because you accidentally use the wrong term in a world where the terms change every 5 minutes. I saw this a lot around the gender stuff, with men particularly who are working in corporations. So they were all playing catch up. They didn't know anything. I barely knew anything about all of the gender stuff. When I started working at Playboy, I had to look up all the terms. I knew nothing. I was like, what happened? There's 16 genders now. I didn't know any of this. And men will kind of write to me and be like, oh, I stepped in it with HR, because they didn't know. They just didn't know. And I think that it's so important that you guys have this space where we can mess up and say the wrong thing and have honest conversations. And then when you come, you know, from that place of shared humanity, then we can have a conversation about whether or not a solution or a policy is effective or not effective. But if we can't even talk, like, how are we going to have that conversation? There's no compromise right now at all. It's just, it's good versus, everything seems like the existential good versus evil.
That's right. But I've got a lot of hope, and you're making it easier for us, because you're making it easier for people to mess up, say the wrong thing, and come back and try it again. So.
Okay, good. Well, I'll keep being an idiot publicly.
Do it so that we can all do it.
Yeah. Right. When people are like, why are you such an idiot online? Why are you such a moron? I'll be like, for the benefit of mankind.
Exactly. Just tell them I'm making it easier for you to be an idiot. You know, because honestly, we're all guilty of it one way or another.
Yeah.
Bridget, this has been wonderful.
This has been great.
We're going to continue marching through this Phetasy that we are all living in. And for folks who are listening, do you want to tell people where they can follow you, where they can keep up with you? What's your Twitter handle, all that?
You can follow me at Bridget Phetasy, it's BRIDGET PHETASY, anywhere pretty much online. And then Phetasy.com, you can subscribe. You can subscribe to Phetasy YouTube channel, and Walk-Ins Welcome is my podcast, which you can pretty much find anywhere podcasts are available.
Beautiful. And while you're at it, get involved in the mission of Braver Angels. Go to braverangels.org. Sign up and join the mission to build a house united and to fix politics in America. And we appreciate you for listening, and join us next time. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Monica. Till then.
Doing the dance to say goodbye.
That's
Bye,
right.
all.